Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. I'm John Matron, Director of Real Estate at Geico and Executive Committee member for the Mid-Atlantic chapter of Cornet. Today, we'll be meeting with United Therapeutics executives to tour and discuss their net zero headquarters in Silver Spring. And before we get into it, I'd like to just provide a couple updates on some upcoming chapter events. Eastern Regional Symposium will be May 17th and registration's open. Spring Golf, May 24th, and the Tech Symposium this year will be June 17th. So keep an eye out for a save the date on that one. During this afternoon's discussions, questions are encouraged throughout the tour, so please do feel free to submit questions through the chat function and we'll pick them up as best we can. And without further delay, we'll get into it and I'll introduce our speakers today. Mr. Avi Halpart, Vice President, Corporate Real Estate for United Therapeutics, and Thomas Kaufman, Senior Director, Corporate Real Estate, United Therapeutics. Gentlemen, thanks again for joining us and carving out the time today. And
my pleasure.
I'll turn the floor over, and if you don't mind giving us the tour and the presentation of your headquarters.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, John. So I think the first thing we're actually going to do, just to give kind of an overview and flavor of the facility, since unfortunately we can't actually physically host you, is play a quick little video that that has some key members of the team just talking about the experience of designing and building this facility. So Michelle, if you don't mind hitting start, please. I think there actually should be some audio.
Young daughter had a disease called pulmonary arterial hypertension, which is a rare disease that, if untreated, it causes the heart to overexert itself and the patient ultimately to die. The mission is to save as many lives as possible by creating an unlimited supply of transplantable lungs.
Working with a client like Unisphere really sets the bar very high for us. Not only do they have their own mission and vision of saving lives, improving lives, they also want then their buildings to be a reflection of their mission.
For years and years, as architects and engineers, we would focus on aesthetics of buildings. We would focus on creating an interior environment that was really conducive to the people that were inhabiting the building. But now we're really looking at how can a building improve its environment externally.
The net zero building is a building that produces as much energy within a calendar year as it consumes. So the ability to create more and more net zero buildings that function like this is good for all of us. I think one of the things that people really like about this space is the abundance of natural light.
The central atrium really works as a thermal chimney.
There are more obvious features like the operable vents below the floor,
daylighting panels with solar panels, of course.
There are lights that indicate what mode the building is functioning in.
There's a display wall that shows you how much energy we are creating and how much energy we are consuming.
I hope this building changes the field of architecture. Energy is a scarce resource, and we always see a drive toward reducing energy consumption, but this project proves that it can be done.
I think in the future, the role of net zero buildings will become more and more common. And I think the technologies are improving to allow us to achieve it more economically. It's a game changer in the world of sustainability and net zero. Our hope is that this leads other owners and other developers to do what they thought maybe was not possible.
The engineering structure of it, the way that it functions, plus just the level of finish and the quality of aesthetic, all of that packaged up into this building is an example of what's possible for net zero sustainable buildings.
Thank you, Michelle. So, good afternoon. My name is Avi Halpert, and I think I've almost been here since the beginning of the construction group and real estate group at United Therapeutics. Clearly, we're not the first building to do net zero, site net zero, but we did one in a very tight urban environment, and trying to figure out where to put almost 3,000 solar panels became quite the challenge. You know, had we been West Coast or out in a more suburban area, we could have taken advantage of just the raw land area. But the main focus of the building was to generate enough power to make it sustainable on the footprint. At one point, we looked at putting it on adjacent buildings that we owned, and our CEO, Dr. Rothblatt, told us that if we couldn't achieve everything we needed on the site, forget it. The project wouldn't happen. So we went back, modeling EUI and figuring out shading, probably dozens of time through an exercise to make this happen. Thomas?
Next slide, please, Michelle. So as Avi mentioned, the project started with this audacious goal from the highest level of our organization. Before we knew anything about this building, we knew it was going to be net zero. And we jokingly say that we had to Google net zero, surreptitiously while Martine was telling us about this new project. But if you go back to 2010, when we first started talking about it, net zero was a much less known term. But as we started to understand what it meant to be site net zero in an urban area where we're really constricted by space, our ability to generate solar is limited because we're surrounded by relatively tall buildings. We realized that the normal way of doing business and of executing projects was just not going to work. And we really oriented the entire project team around this net zero goal. And we made the primary metric for any decision understanding what the impact would be on energy performance. And that was really the only way that I think we were able to achieve net zero, given all these challenging circumstances. And I think the net zero bar, the site net zero bar in particular, it is a very high bar that probably cannot be applied to every single project. But one of the takeaways from our experience that I think can be applied to other projects is this idea of making energy performance a defining metric of success for any project. And as Avi mentioned, at every iteration of design, procurement, and various phases of construction, we were constantly evaluating every decision related to how it impacts energy performance. And I think that's a key takeaway moving forward. Next slide, please. So we started by creating these two big buckets of energy saving strategies. The passive strategies being strategies that don't require any energy, but save energy. So things like orienting the building to allow for a large amount of surface area that's facing to the south so that we can maximize energy generation. Installing external shades so that we can keep heat gain outside of the building. Providing access to natural daylight from multiple sources so that we don't need or can minimize the amount of artificial light. The form of the building was really driven by this desire to naturally ventilate the building whenever possible. So we have this large central atrium and shallow floor plate, and about 25% of the year, mostly in spring and fall and temperate, when we have temperate weather, the building actually naturally ventilates. Exterior windows open up and we're drawing fresh outside air in. Our earth labyrinth, which is actually an old Roman technology that we'll talk a little bit about more later, harnesses the constant temperature of the earth to passively heat and cool and temper a space. Looking at some of the active strategies, geo-exchange, really critical for us when we started doing the exercise of just looking at how do we reduce consumption? And that was a huge part of our effort because we were so limited by our ability to generate solar. Again, because being in an urban location where the building itself takes up most of the footprint of the property. And so we didn't have the luxury of being able to install a large solar array, at an adjacent field. We were really limited on the generation side. So that pushed us to focus all of our energy really on reducing energy consumption. And so geo-exchange is a huge part of how we did that. Electrochromic glazing is an interesting technology that we employed here, so we can dynamically tint all windows. So in the wintertime, when we want to benefit from free heat gain, we have the windows default to not being tinted, but in the summer, when you want to keep that heat gain out so we can cool the building, the windows are all automatically tinted. Building automation is something that we'll talk a little more about. It was really central to operating a building as complicated as the Unisphere. And this is something that we realized somewhat early on. We didn't set out to build a smart building. That was never part of the mandate. But as we understood the challenges of being constrained on the energy generation side and how we were going to really have to get aggressive when it came to reducing energy consumption, all the systems that we ended up deploying, well, those all had to be centralized, controlled, and also providing, in a perfect world, clear visibility into the data of the performance of the building, and that all hinged on building automation. And of course, plug load management and renewable energy were a big piece of the puzzle as well. Next slide, please.
So faced with uncertainty with climate change, we wanted to make sure we could take this building out 10, 15, 20 years and continue to have a high performing building. We employed many of those actually all those elements. The triple pane windows actually behind me. I'm actually presenting today from my office in the Unisphere. So you're looking at the electrochromatic glass. But the one thing that Thomas and I had the luxury of doing before we signed up any of these elements, we went and visited facilities that had the electrochromatic. We actually went to a couple manufacturing facilities. So we were able to test drive just about everything that was employed in this building. And I think one of the more amazing things is that everything in this building, while it's an incredible building, was off-the-shelf technology. There was nothing custom, yes, the shape, but all in all, the technologies behind the building operations, exterior, were all items that were available.
Next slide, please, Michelle. So one of the most striking spaces of the building is this central atrium. From a architectural standpoint, from a user experience, it's really a pretty impressive space to be in. It also actually plays a really central role in the heating and cooling strategy for the building. So it's this huge volume of space, and as we were understanding, how we were going to heat and cool this space, clearly it would have a huge energy toll because of just the enormous amount of air in the space. And we ended up deciding to not mechanically heat or cool this space. It is actually treated as a tempered space, and it is passively heated and cooled via the earth labyrinth, which Avi's going to talk about. And as I mentioned earlier, when we are going into natural ventilation mode, this space plays a really important role. We're taking advantage of the stack effect that naturally happens. And so when our building automation system determines that the exterior weather conditions allow for natural ventilation, which again, as I mentioned, ends up being about 25% of the year, exterior windows automatically open up and we draw fresh outside air in through the office spaces and then release it into the central atrium. And then the stack effect passively exhausts those through the top of the atrium. So another interesting feature that's pretty prominent within this space is our lap pool. And this was a requirement that came from our CEO, and she's one of the most frequent users of the pool, along with a few other brave souls who are not too shy and comfortable getting into their bathing suits in the lobby of their office building. There's a handful of them. There's some interesting ways that we worked this into the net zero strategy. It presents some challenges, certainly, but one of the opportunities that we saw was taking advantage of the need to find places to reject heat from the geo-exchange system. So because we end up cooling the building more often than we're heating the building over the course of a year, we would, by default, reject more heat into the earth. And over time, that would reduce the delta in the temperature underground from the temperature outside. And so that would reduce the efficiency of the geo-exchange system. And in order to avoid doing that, we reject heat from the geo-exchange system into the pool. So we're passively warming that pool, so it's a nice, comfortable space for our employees. It has a operable pool floor. So right now in this picture in the bottom right corner, it's in pool mode. But there's a mechanical system that actually allows us to adjust the depth, and we can actually make it a structurally sound walkable floor. And that was a very challenging from an engineering procurement standpoint. The design builder actually was based in Europe, and I can tell you it's been challenging to get them to maintain the pool during COVID times. But nevertheless, it's an interesting feature that we incorporated into the net zero strategy that presented some challenges and opportunities. Next slide, please.
So we talked about the labyrinth, and what you're looking at is, I think, just about a half a mile maze that where we take outside air. So fronting, everybody's familiar, the building fronts on Colesville Road in downtown Silver Spring. We take outdoor air. We've got it filtered. It goes down a long concrete hallway and then drops 12 feet below our surface garage structure, the first floor of it, and you've essentially have a mouse maze down there. One little side story: while our EH&S people remind us that it's confined space, our CEO wanted a tour of it one evening, and I think Thomas and I probably broke out into a sweat when we got a little turned around and couldn't figure out where the exit door was at the end. But all in all, it's been able to maintain the tempered air in the atrium. And I just second ago, our Jason Fierco, the engineering guru at Ewing Cole, advised me that it's 676,000 cubic feet of area inside the atrium of the Unisphere. So I can tell you the first winter of 2018, I was a little nervous because we've got wet sprinkler system over there. I think we dipped probably as low as about 45 degrees. And the warmest we've ever achieved or realized in the space has been about 82, 83 degrees. So it's doing its job. Next, Michelle. Just a quick graph. Before we purchased the property, we conducted one test drill. We dropped a thermometer down there, and we're taking regular readings from it just to make sure our energy modeling and all our assumptions were correct. So we did that for over a year, and that factored into the basis of design and the energy system. We're actually will be breaking ground for a net zero warehouse in North Carolina, and we're implementing some of the same due diligence down there. Next, Michelle. So Geo Exchange, a 60,000 square foot footprint of an urban site, and we designed a system with 52, 53 wells on it. Thomas and I went up to the Department of Health in Montgomery County, submitted our permit. We gave them, I think it was $22 per drill fee. And then by the time we made it back to our offices, we were notified that the plans were rejected. Why were they rejected? Because the state of Maryland does not allow wells under a footprint of a building. Needless to say, we were a little taken aback, but we were advised by our team, don't worry, Thomas and Avi will, instead of 52 wells at 550 feet, we will drill 26, 27 around the perimeter in the plaza, at the loading dock at about 1,000 feet. on our monthly call with our CEO and presenting to her, we showed her our new geo plan, and she quickly killed it, advising us that urban sites would never be able to achieve net zero if in fact they couldn't use the footprint of the physical building to house geo-exchange wells. That being said, we went into lobbying mode, went up to the Maryland Department of Environment, and within 4 months changed the regulations in the state of Maryland to allow for geo-exchange wells to sit under the footprint of the building. This is the first building in the state of Maryland. The people at the Maryland Department of Environment came down and were watching and fascinated, and actually amended some of their regulations after they saw what they put us through. The second building in the state of Maryland is Montgomery County Department of Permitting Services, the Park and Planning and Parks Department up in Wheaton, Maryland. Next.
The classic Martine anecdote there. We always like telling that one. You can see a great visual here of the building, and clearly one of the most striking features from the exterior is the solar panels. The panels were really located at every possible location, again, because the defining criteria for success for us was achieving net zero. So, you know, budgetary decisions around solar and whether or not we were locating solar panels in a location where they would get their maximum output, you know, that was really a secondary concern. We needed the additional output. So even if we were installing solar in a location where we would be significantly impacted by shading, for example, you know, at the end of the day, we needed the production. And so that's what drove the decision making. Next slide, please, Michelle. You can see here an overview of the different arrays that we have. And we think of them as 4 different arrays. The largest array is on the roof. We call it the solar tray. And then we've got another large array that's integrated with the curtain wall on the southern facade, which presented a lot of challenges from a engineering constructability standpoint. And then there's a large array on top of the parking garage. And there's a small little solar wall that is located on the southern facade of the parking garage. So all in all, it's 1 megawatt of generation. One of the, at the time, new technologies that we implemented was mini inverters. And so on the arrays that are most significantly impacted by shading, which is primarily the vertical array on the southern facade and the array on top of the parking garage, the way that these arrays work when it comes to inverters and strings is typically there's about 8 to 10 panels per string per inverter. And if any one of those solar panels is shaded, then effectively every single panel within that string is shaded. And these mini inverters allow us to reduce the number of panels that are part of a string from 8 to 10 down to 2. And so that actually added about 10% additional solar production by installing those mini inverters. The trade-off is that we had to install another device at array locations that really have some challenging maintenance issues or access issues. That southeastern facade, it's not easy to get to something if it breaks. We analyzed the failure rates of these devices, and they ended up being comparable to the arrays that we were installing. So we ultimately decided that a 10% boost was worth the maintenance headaches. We haven't had any fail yet, so that's good, because when they do fail, it's not going to be fun. Next slide, please. Systems integration was huge for this project. One of the things that we learned early on is that if we were going to be successful in operating a net zero building, we were going to have clear visibility into the data, and we're going to have to be able to rely on that data. And all of that data is going to come from the controls vendor. We were going to live and die with our controls subcontractor. And it's always been a challenge for us managing controls subcontractors. No offense to any controls contractors that might be on the call, but visibility into the world of controls was historically challenging for us. And it was not unusual for us to be a couple of months or even weeks away from substantial completion, and for there to be some person sitting on a bucket in a closet working on a laptop, and no one had any idea what they were doing. And we wanted to really go away from that kind of black box experience. So one of the first subcontractors that we brought on board actually was our control subcontractor, was Schneider. And we mapped out the systems integration process from day one. And it was a bi-weekly kind of all hands on deck meeting between us as owners, our IT group, our facilities and maintenance group, our general contractor, our controls contractor, key MEP subs, and we all sat around the table mapping out the systems integration process. And I can tell you, it totally changed the experience that we had with controls. And I think without this approach, it frankly would have been a nightmare. And the commissioning process was further supported by having this very well structured and mapped out approach to controls and visibility into data. So this is one of those lessons learned that we've taken and implemented on multiple projects since the Unisphere. And it's a good lessons learned, not just for those that are pursuing net zero sustainable buildings, but really for smart buildings. And obviously our buildings are getting smarter, and the people that build them need to get smarter as well. And that is a challenge that we found on this building. There's the people that understand construction, but are challenged with IT. There's the people that understand IT, but are challenged with construction. And this was the first project where we really had to bridge that gap. And this was one of the strategies that we think was pretty effective in doing so. Next slide, please. So here's a visualization of some of the data that we broadcast throughout the building. And I'm not going to spend too much time because I think we're running a little longer. So if we can skip to the next slide, please, Michelle. We spent a lot of effort on thinking about occupant engagement. One, because occupants have a big impact on the energy performance of the building. And two, because we wanted people to understand that this was a unique and special building with a really cool mission. And we wanted people to get excited about net zero and sustainability. And so one of the approaches that we took was creating these very striking, large infographics that described different components of the sustainability strategy in non-engineers language, very plain English, with some simple graphics that just give a sense of how different components of the building work. These are located throughout the office space. Next slide, please.
And just real quick, just before we shut down operations, clearly not our drug operations, but all the support operations in March of 2020, from the date we opened in September of 2018 up until almost a week before we shut down the office, we've had upwards of about 60 different groups that have worked their way through the Unisphere as a participant in tours. We had Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. We had several architecture schools. We had architects. We had Maryland Department of Energy. We had U.S. Department of Energy. We had NIST. We have a log somewhere, but we were all about sharing what we did, sharing lessons learned, and there were no secrets relative to what we did right and what we did wrong, and how we would do things differently in the future. Go ahead, Thomas.
So back on the topic of data, we realized that we would have an opportunity to tell the story of the building via all of this real-time data that the building was going to be generating just during the course of operating it. And so we saw that as an opportunity to create some interesting visualizations. We wanted these visualizations to be aesthetically pleasing, educational, interesting. We wanted to avoid being overly didactic and becoming a distraction. At the end of the day, this building is here to provide a space where people can be productive and help United Therapeutics work on our audacious life-saving goals. We didn't want people to think that the net zero mission got in the way of that. So the visual that you can see here has multiple levels of engagement, and that central touchscreen allows people to just kind of walk by it. And what you're seeing here is actually one of the deeper levels. The default visualization is just two horizontal bars, one representing consumption, one representing production. And the height of those bars reflects the actual real-time usage for both of those categories. And there's a diffused LED installation for 15 feet on each side of that display. And whatever happens on the screen is recreated in the LED diffused visual there. And so if an occupant wants to learn more about what's going on, you can swipe up and those 2 bars turn into these 5 bars. And you can dig even deeper. If you want to understand some of the components of the heating and cooling system, you can access some infographics. You can sift through historic data, and you can even gamify the data. So you can change different variables like time of day, time of year, level of occupancy, and you can move the slide bars up, and the bars change as a result. So it's a way for employees to, if they want to, learn more, but also to just kind of provide a quick visibility into what's going on with the building, again, without it being distracting or annoying. Next slide, please. We thought a lot also about user experience. Again, we want our employees to be happy and productive. They're all very highly educated, compensated people. And the last thing we wanted was them to feel like this wasn't a place where they could be happy and productive. So we put a lot of effort into thinking about how we could give people control over their space. The building automation system clearly has some intelligence, and there's some algorithms that are determining what kind of mechanical mode we're in. Are we naturally ventilating? Are we heating? Are we cooling? But we wanted to make sure that occupants didn't feel like they had no ability to control their space. So we have a device within everyone's office that allows them to control temperature. It allows them to override certain components of the building automation system. So if we go into natural ventilation mode, and maybe an occupant is on a conference call, that means that exterior window is opening up onto Spring Street. And that could be loud, that could be disruptive. So within that device, an employee has the ability to close that window as well. They can also control electrochromic glazing, and they can control ceiling fans. So we wanted to make sure that people had that sense of kind of ownership of their own comfort, but doing so in a way that still fit with the overall operational strategy of the building.
But before you move on, one of the things that we had the luxury of doing in a warehouse, I think it was in Landover, Maryland, for 2 years, we rented a warehouse, and we built a life-size mock-up, a through-wall section from the exterior glazing to the atrium. We fitted out down to the furniture with all the elements of the building that you see here. And we looked at constructability, where some of the vendors were having problems, and we simplified a few things. We also, towards the end and before we delivered the building, we brought through various user groups in so they could orient themselves to the standing desk that was no longer automatic but had a crank. We gave them options for furniture that they could have, but it was a way to orient people into what their new experience was going to be beforehand, so it wasn't going to be like walking into that new home without some understanding of its operations. Next, Michelle. So contingency plans for geo exchange. We discovered that occasionally wells blow and don't hold, and you need to figure out in a tight urban site where you can place that next well without interfering with other wells, without interfering with the superstructure, without interfering with other utilities that you needed to stay like 10 feet off the main sewer line, likewise the water lines, and some other conduits that came through. So in advance of drilling, make sure you know where that extra well could be located to mitigate the time delay associated with bringing your consultant out. Thomas?
Integration effort, I think we probably talked about this one enough already, but this was a lesson learned for us that as I said, we're implementing on a lot of future projects, just bringing that controls subcontractor on board early and really thinking through what the systems integration process looks like. This next one is kind of an interesting one. So after a year's worth of occupancy, we looked at the data to understand if we met our net zero goal. And we realized that we had some conflicting data sets. The building automation system was giving us one output. The power monitoring system was giving us a different one. And the Pepco billing was giving us something completely different. Yeah. And this actually led to to a dispute with Pepco. Avi, you want to touch on that?
Yeah, we had to go before the Maryland Utility Commission to have Pepco fully realize our net metering. It wasn't insignificant, but if we didn't catch it early over the lifetime of the project, it would have added up. So the bigger lesson learned is to take out those Pepco invoices, look at the consumption and validate it against what the building is telling. I think we've probably socialized this issue with Pepco. Hopefully nobody in the future has any issues with it, but double check it.
On the topic of mock-ups, Avi talked about the mock-up that we put out at the warehouse in Landover. We also did a integration mock-up, which was really interesting and very useful. We had a requirement within our RFP that the general contractor within, I think, 150 days, deliver a systems integration mockup in which every component that was, or a sample of every component that was going to be connected to the BAS had to be physically connected and virtually controlled. And this totally changed the buyout process. As I mentioned, the controls contractor came on first. But we also ended up having to engage MEP contractors, manufacturers to get these devices. And it was, excuse me, instrumental in mapping out that systems integration process and something that again, we're going to use going forward. The solar tray cantilever, that's really a constructability challenge. We wanted to maximize the ability to generate solar, and that meant that we were cantilevering that tray, that solar tray, well outside of the building structure, and there were some significant cost challenges that came along with that one. Expectations.
Hey Thomas, let me with the solar tray, essentially another roof on top of our roof. The sub bullet lesson learned to that is your insurance company, and ours is FM Global. Involve them early and often. They had a lot of comments on the roof, and it took a little while to make them happy with the design. So again, that wasn't the only area that they wanted to know about, but future projects, we actually have a whole schedule of submittals that they look at in tandem with our design engineering team. Go ahead, Thomas.
Yeah, I'll be real quick on this one because I think we're running out of time and we want to give time for questions. But expectations of trade contractors, what we focused on a lot with, particularly on this project, was getting everyone excited and bought in on the mission of the building. And, even down to the people that were, the laborers on site, we made sure that everyone heard the message of what United Therapeutics was doing in terms of our, mission to create life-saving therapies, but also the mission of the building itself and related to the net zero mission. And that, I think, paid dividends on multiple levels. So with that, I think I'll turn it back over to John, and we've got a little bit of time for Q&A.
Yeah, great. Avi, Thomas, thank you so much. we regret we weren't able to do some of this in person, but appreciate you guys walking us through, giving us the tour and letting us look through some things here. First question that came to my mind is, can you believe it's done?
It was a long process. It was about 8 years from Martine's email to certificate of occupancy. So when it was done, it was almost like there was a sense of loss. It was kind of bittersweet.
I bet. So we do have some time for some questions. So some are coming through now, and I'll start taking them. So please do drop them into the chat function as questions come up. We just had one come through right now about retrofitting buildings, and based on your experience, if you think it'll be possible to retrofit a building to be net zero.
Yeah, I mean it's been done actually in the DC area. The Geophysicist Union's headquarters, I think it's called. I forget the name of the organization, but it's in DuPont Circle. They did a retrofit of their headquarters, and they installed a really large solar tray. They employed some similar technology that we used, and it's doable. The big challenge, particularly if you're doing that in a urban environment, is going to be the limitations of solar generation. And the willingness to get really aggressive on the consumption side. But the engineering challenges have been solved when it comes to net zero. The bigger challenges, I think, are around, the business model of real estate development. That makes it very difficult. In most instances, we're corporate end users. We're not trying to generate net operating income. But if you have the typical model for the real estate development, that 15%-ish premium to go net zero, which is roughly what we calculated for this project, well, that can totally kill your project.
Right. One question that came through is about the light sculpture in the atrium. If you could talk more about how that works.
Yeah, so that's another example of using real-time data to create a visualization around the energy performance of the building. And so it's about a 30-foot in diameter array of circular mirrored light fixtures. And based on the energy status of the building, the lights animate in a different way. So if we have a real-time energy surplus, there's a certain animation. And if we have a energy deficit, which of course happens, right? Over the course of a year, there's times when we're pulling energy from the grid at night, for example, when we're not generating any solar. But over the course of the year, we make more than we generate. So it's this very prominent visualization that goes back to that idea of doing something that's cool and interesting and not annoying to have to look at every day, that visualizes how the building is working behind the scenes.
John, it was a group out of Brooklyn, New York called Hush that helped us with all these deliverables, down to the static ones in the building hallways. They also helped us produce a book that we gave out during our grand opening that makes for teaching net zero to kids a little easier, because it's very colorful and interactive.
Very cool. One of the slides that caught my attention was the I guess the passive versus active means for achieving your goals. Do you have any sense of, on a relative basis, how much impact do you get from the passive means of achieving your net zero goals?
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. The form of the building itself was really central to everything. So having that large southern exposure, which really gave us a prayer of meeting the energy generation needs. The natural ventilation mode, the ability to do that all comes from the form of the building itself, and having that large central atrium. And I forget if I mentioned this or not, but when we are in natural ventilation mode, the building consumes about as much energy as a typical suburban home, which is just, mind-boggling. This is a 135,000 square foot commercial office building. So on the energy consumption side, those passive strategies were really significant. The geo exchange, I guess, technically isn't a passive strategy, but that also had a huge impact on just reducing our mechanical consumption.
Just for just to put it in numbers, our electric bill averages about $1,500 a month for the entire building, of which I'd probably say about 65% of that are charges by Pepco to use the grid as the battery. So we don't have any battery storage at this project. Actually, our next project in North Carolina, we're looking at a battery storage technology down there, but not bad for a monthly utility bill.
Yeah, I'm giving you a run for your money at my house, that's for sure. What's your experience been with operations and keeping the lights on? It's kind of day in, day out.
There's a lot of moving pieces. All those operable windows, I don't know the number offhand, but it's a lot of actuators that need to be maintained. And this is one of the painful aspects. The design builder it's a European company, and so a lot of those components are coming over from Europe. But I will say, at the end of the day, as Avi mentioned, it's all off-the-shelf technology. There's nothing that is so foreign that our typical building engineers can't manage it. It's the pumps, it's the belts, it's all the same kind of stuff, but there's a lot of moving pieces. There's more of it. The control side of it, I think, is also presents some unique challenges from just an operational resources standpoint. We end up having it's a full-time contractor from Schneider on campus, not just for the Unisphere. We've got a lot of unique process things going on with our manufacturing operations. But having that resource is really critical because, as I mentioned, the whole thing lives and dies by controls.
Understood. How was the learning curve getting your engineering team up to speed on how to operate the building?
I think we're still experiencing it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, but John, we had them at key meetings throughout the design and construction process. So there were only so many things they could say they didn't have knowledge and input on, but there's still elements 3 years out from delivery that they're learning and getting a little bit more proficient in.
Understood. Can you tell us a little bit about site selection, and did you expand your site selection before you landed on the Silver Spring site, or was it always going to be Silver Spring?
Yeah, this was kind of a unique situation. So the site was originally a county operated parking garage, and it had a 0 lot line with our manufacturing operation. So the structure itself was abutting our manufacturing facility, and there were some structural issues with the parking garage, and we heard through the grapevine that it was probably going to be marketed for sale. And the first thing we were concerned about was a third party other than the county getting control of the site and developing it and not really caring about coordinating with our manufacturing activities. There's a lot of equipment that is extremely sensitive to vibration. So the first thing we wanted to do was just control the site. And so that kind of drove the site selection acquisition process. And before we even knew what we were going to build there, as Avi mentioned, we got this net zero mandate from our CEO. So it was like, okay, we need to control the site and it's going to be net zero. Who's going to be occupying it? We didn't figure that out until well into construction. This was a very unusual project from a kind of planning and execution standpoint. So it was always going to be in Silver Spring. But any facility that we consider typically is going to end up at one of our 2 major campuses, either here in Silver Spring or down in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina. And I'm sure as many can commiserate on this topic, the Montgomery County entitlement process is pretty long, pretty complicated, pretty expensive. And when you compare it to the Durham County process, it's a cakewalk. It's something like 2 years versus 6 months. So this facility ended up in Silver Spring in Montgomery County, and we've got plans to continue growing in Montgomery County. But anytime I get a chance to get on my soapbox and talk about some of the challenges that come with building in Montgomery County, I do. I also should say Montgomery County has been a fantastic partner for us, and they are always there to help us get through that process. You know, a lot of the land that our campus occupies was bought from the county, so they've been a great partner. And I don't want to be too harsh on them, but as probably most of us know, it's not the easiest place to go through the development process.
Yeah, and John, we're in Silver Spring because our CEO lives in the abutting neighborhood where she raised her family, and the company originally started out with a 11,000 square foot, 3.5 story, circa 1960 building that we tore down, I think in 2009. So you know, the company got its start here, and that's why we're here, and it's why most corporate headquartered decisions are crafted on where CEOs and key executives live.
Deep roots. I think we've got time for maybe a couple more quick questions here. You mentioned a 15% upfront premium on construction. So you talked about utilities and you know, costs there, but other operating accounts, are you seeing a corresponding premium in operations? An example would be operating windows, the operable windows. And
yeah, I think we stocked up on those components early on. I'm trying. Other than Windows, and we've gone through a learning curve and probably would do things a little differently. One little sidebar story: the first year of operation, when we hit spring, some of the occupants wanted to know what filters we had when the windows were open because of the pollen. That was a bit of an oversight, but. I think we sort of took a little while to respond. I think they forgot about it, but you know, is an issue when you open up the windows. You know, my window was open earlier today when it was a little warmer, but I don't think anything out of the ordinary. One of the nice things we did, and that our general contractor did, as we were awarding different elements of the building, we created an operating budget. So when the elevator award recommendation letter was given, we had our line item for, you know, the service agreement on an annual basis with miscellaneous repairs. You know, when the cleaning crew sends up the vacuum cleaner with the cord hanging out. But by the time we delivered the building, we had a pretty robust budget model. The only anomaly was what Montgomery County and the state of Maryland was going to tax us on this. But
yeah, I think the only kind of outlier there is just the building automation system, and that's the piece that's outside of the normal building engineer, you know, comfort level. And so, you know, as I mentioned, we have an on-site resource from Schneider, and that's probably outside, you know, the normal kind of building operations resource. But other than that, it's more moving pieces, but it's the same kind of moving pieces that we have on other buildings. And so I wouldn't say that there's, you know, a material premium outside of the controls piece.
Avi, Thomas, think you'd be up for a tour when things get back to as close to normal as they might get?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then likewise, John, if anybody has any questions about any elements, you know, we did quite a bit of due diligence. Granted, technology has moved on, but some of the elements and some of the lessons learned, and if there's any, you know, aspects of the building, you know, we're available. It's Thomas at Unither, UNITHER.com, and Avi, AVI, at Unither.com. So don't be bashful. We're really good about sharing.
We'll take you up on that.
Okay.
Gentlemen, thank you again for carving out the time and giving us a peek at everything you're doing at the Unisphere. And thank you to the Education Committee for getting the event together. And as always, thank you our sponsors for all the support we get from the chapter, and thanks everyone who dialed in. We'll talk to you all real soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.